When the static cleared at 3:14 GMT, I heard voices that should not have been there. My Kenwood transceiver was tuned to 9.247 mH, a slice of the shortwave spectrum usually occupied by lonely ham operators trading signal reports or government time beacons. Instead, a low male chorus rose from the noise like basalt emerging from fog. The language was nothing I recognized. Sibilants gliding into gutturals, vowels held until they vibrated against one another and formed chords. Beneath the chanting rolled a bone-deep drone, as though the earth's mantle itself had decided to sing. Gooseflesh marched up my forearms, yet I kept listening, compelled by equal parts curiosity and dread. When the transmission faded, it left the room too quiet, as though the sound had stolen ordinary ambience with it. I posted a recording to the Number Station Sleuths forum, expecting a handful of cryptographers to speculate it was a new Russian cipher or an avant-garde art prank. By dawn, the thread had exploded. Operators from Finland, Brazil, Japan, and South Africa reported identical receptions. Audio spectrograms matched within 1/10 of a hertz, an impossibility if these signals had originated from different pirate transmitters. Something powerful and centralized was throwing its voice over half the planet. People tried feeding the chant into automatic translators. The software coughed up gibberish, then crashed. One user, Voxphage, claimed he fell asleep while the audio looped and woke to find he'd carved a spiral-like design into his teak desk with a utility knife. He posted photos. A ring of nested curves bisected by 4 radial lines, delicate yet somehow brutal, like a flayed nautilus shell. A week later, global news outlets caught up. Emergency rooms from Reykjavik to Jakarta reported patients entering dissociative hypnotic states. Eyes rolled back, humming the same droning chord while their hands scratched that precise sigil on whatever surface lay nearest. Bark, drywall, even skin. The UN's World Health Committee called it an emergent mass psychogenic event enabled by radio. That tidy bureaucratic phrase did nothing to explain why I, and presumably thousands of others, kept returning to 9.247 miss every night. My girlfriend Mara tried to confiscate my receiver until she discovered me unconsciously penciling the sigil in the condensation on the bathroom mirror. We agreed unplugging the radio was pointless when something inside us had already been tuned. I decided the only rational act left was to trace the source. Direction finding requires triangulation. Ideally, you log signal bearings from at least 3 distant points and crunch the angles. I convinced 2 friends, Samir in Mumbai and Julia in Buenos Aires, to set up synchronized sweeps. After 3 nights, we had an improbable fix, a location in the Nepalese highlands near the Tibetan border, far from any known transmitter. The coordinates lay within a blank spot on civilian maps, an area labeled simply Ganesh S4. A bureaucratic brushstroke over 400 square kilometers of glaciers, scree, and myth. The moment felt cinematic. Yet banal logistics intruded. Flights, visas, permits. I rang an old college acquaintance, Dr. Alice Hargraves, now with UNESCO's Cultural Preservation Wing. I fed her a partial truth, rogue transmissions threatening public safety, and begged for help accessing the restricted zone. She hesitated, then mentioned a derelict monastery rumored among anthropologists. Inaccessible since the Chinese annexation of Tibet, never photographed by satellite for reasons no agency would clarify. She warned that helicopter pilots refused to overfly the area, citing compass reversal and engine malaise, folk shorthand for instruments vomiting nonsense. 42 sleepless hours later, Mara and I landed in Kathmandu's damp winter dusk. Alice met us with a jeep and an apologetic grin. She'd prepared forged research credentials and a letter of passage that might, in a pin, frighten off local gendarmes. We drove north through switchbacks cluttered with landslide debris, then transferred to battered Royal Enfield motorbikes where the road ended. Every kilometer the air grew thinner and the sense of auditory pressure stronger, as though we were entering the very lung from which that chant exhaled. There was no mobile reception, but if I flicked the portable receiver on, the chorus glimmered at full signal strength regardless of terrain. Our ears felt wet with it, and like moss-covered stones, we reached the last inhabited village, Chipu, clinging to a misty ridge. Elders refused us lodging, mumbling about Singa Chayortan, the stone-mouthed stupa. An old woman tugged my sleeve, pointed at my chest. I looked down. I'd absent-mindedly traced the sigil into frost on my jacket. She spat and retreated indoors. By dawn we walked under a sky so blue it looked bruised. The path dissolved into goat tracks, then into nothing. Only the receiver's growing whine urged us upward. Shortly after noon the monastery appeared, not built atop the mountain, but hewn into its side. A cusp of black stone, like a geode, split and inverted. No prayer flag snapped in wind, no color relieved its geometric severity. Yet the music poured from it, not amplified, simply radiating. The building's face was smooth, save for a single doorway. Giant concentric circles, our sigil, were carved into the lintel, gnawed by wind into deeper definition. Mara gripped my wrist so tight my bones spoke. Inside, a corridor funneled us toward a central hall. We expected gloom but encountered blinding light, as though the mountain's heart housed its own dawn. Monks 20, maybe 30 stood in an oval, chanting. Their saffron robes hung in strips faded almost to bone white. Their eyes were sewn shut, literally thin copper wire laced through lids in deliberate X's. Yet they moved with perfect spatial precision, each sway synchronized, voices merging into that godless chord. In the hall's center sat a bronze transmitter unlike any technology I knew, a cylinder covered in moving glyphs, turning silently, though nothing mechanical powered it. Cables braided from dried sinew ran to a mast piercing the stone ceiling, exiting to broadcast the chant to the world. Samir once joked that every mystery unravels when you find the power plug. I searched the room's perimeter for something to cut, to smash, but the monks blocked us by merely tightening their circle. Mara shook. Alice began humming the bass line of the chant. I yelled her name. She didn't blink. I realized her pupils were dilating and contracting in rhythm with the copper glyphs rotating on the transmitter. Fear sharpened whatever the radio waves had started. Proximity was finishing. The only break in the hall was a staircase spiraling downward. I tugged Mara, half-dragged Alice, and plunged. Gravity stuffed the chant into my ears, a liquid sludge, every step like wading deeper into tar. Below, we found a cavern lined with pictographs older than Tibetan script. They depicted a star falling onto a mountaintop, splitting into shards. From one shard poured seeds shaped like the sigil. People carved those seeds onto stone, then bowed before a black sun newly risen in place of their own. Apocalypse rendered in a storyboard. At the cavern's center stood a bowl the size of a swimming pool, brimful with mercury. Its surface reflected not our faces, but a hole punched through the universe, utter dark studded with pinpoints that pulsed in sympathy with the monk's chant. Each pulse sent faint ripples across the metal, and with each ripple, I felt a command to kneel, carve, surrender. Mara barely resisted, bells digging crescents in her palms. Alice had already taken out a penknife, drawing the sigil slowly into the limestone floor. Her voice joined unseen choirs. I slapped the knife away. She snarled, not with anger, but something like grief that I'd interrupted her salvation. Then she slumped, sobbing. The chant above shifted tempo, quickening like a heartbeat approaching release. I realized the monastery was an organ. The monks had primed it for centuries. The shortwave broadcast wasn't a signal. It was a magnet, aligning receptive minds worldwide into one colossal antenna. When enough sigils had been inscribed, each one a tiny resonator, the network would channel whatever lingered behind that mercury mirror directly into humanity's collective skull. We had minutes, maybe seconds. My rational brain squealed that I was a network engineer, not a mythic hero, but circuits were circuits, an accessory to the engine of war. Circuits were circuits, whether silicon or esoteric flesh. Disable the relay, the system fails. I sprinted back upstairs, leaving Mara to comfort Alice. The monk's circle had widened as though making space for me. Their mouths formed perfect O's. Wire-stitched eyelids fluttered impossibly. No weapon presented itself. I grabbed the nearest cable worm, greasy yanked. It held firm. I jammed my multi-tool blade under it, sawing. A monk's chanting faltered, and a jet of black blood spurted from the cable as though it were an artery. The others staggered but did not stop. Blade slipped from slick gore. I seized a stone torch stand and slammed it onto the transmitter, denting bronze. The glyphs sputtered, some freezing mid-crawl. The global chorus, visible only in my mind, stuttered, like a record skipping. Pain knifed behind my eyes. I sensed millions of distant listeners jerk upright, hands poised with knives, chisels, fingernails above unfinished sigils. If I stopped now, inertia would resume. I swung again. Metal shrieked. A sound like reverse thunder cracked overhead, and wind rushed down the staircase, extinguishing torches, lifting robes. The transmitter bulged outward, seams glowing white-hot. Monk voices soared past human pitch into insectile buzzing. One collapsed, blood threading from his sealed eyes. I brained the cylinder once more. It split, disgorging a sphere of liquid shadow that evaporated mid-air with a sigh that was almost a word. Silence slammed down so hard I tasted copper. My ears rang. Monks lay scattered, breathing but inert, as if their strings had been snipped. I fled downstairs. The mercury bowl roiled, then stilled, reflecting only our trembling faces. Whatever gateway had opened was shuttered, for now. We staggered out of the monastery at dusk. The sky looked normal, which felt miraculous. My receiver, once alive with relentless chant, emitted only static. We descended in half-dream, the mountains strangely quiet. At Chepu, villagers eyed us with wary hope. Babies no longer wept in eerie unison. Mara wrapped herself around me and wept until both our jackets soaked through. Back in Kathmandu, newsfeeds spoke of a transient spike in mass psychogenic illness already subsiding. The sigil still marred desks and arms worldwide, but no new carvings appeared. Governments blamed stress, sunspots, and online hysteria. The 9.247-minute slot reverted to polite static. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I lay awake nights replaying that liquid dark sphere, escaping the ruptured transmitter. Equipment can be destroyed, but an idea? The Chant's geometry, its mimetic clause, now lurks in us. Sometimes when city traffic reaches a certain drone, I catch Mara's hand sketching circles on her thought. Sometimes I wake humming the bass line, and only silence myself by biting my tongue until it bleeds copper. Yesterday a package arrived, with no return address, postmarked Lhasa. Inside was a child's slate, scratched with fresh, unmistakable lines. The sigil. Perfect. Waiting. When I tilt the slate to the window, sunlight winks across the grooves in a rhythm I cannot quite ignore. I tell myself circuits are circuits, and we broke the relay. Yet late at night, static from the radio seems to shake vowels I almost understand, as though the mountain still sings, but only for those already tuned. I switch the Kenwood off, but the room does not grow quiet.